So, on today's podcast, we're talking about the glue of championship teams that seems to hold them together, make them stronger and unique, help them withstand the pressures around them, and ultimately succeed by becoming the best team they could possibly be.
Welcome back to the Thermostat with Jason Barger. If you're currently on a commute, a walk, or just a micro break in your day, glad you're making time to step back, to think, and to reflect on the next steps on your journey. I've never been more convinced the best leaders and team cultures in the world are the ones that make time to step back, breathe in good oxygen, and calibrate their thermostat. I hope today's conversation leaves you feeling grounded and inspired. Now let's dive into today's topic to engage our minds and hearts in order to authentically lead and create compelling cultures wherever we are in the world.
Hey everyone, it's Jason, and welcome back to the Thermostat Podcast, wherever you are and however you're coming to the podcast today. Welcome in. So glad you are here. We are in Season 9, over 260 episodes or something like that now. And so welcome in to anybody who's new to the podcast. This continues to grow, spread. Thanks to everybody who shares it and continues to bring more people into this podcast. So glad if you're new, welcome in. And anybody who's been with us from the very beginning, welcome in. So glad you are back, and so glad that this continues to add value to your life and your work. If you're new, or even if you're one of the originals, I invite you to go back. We have 9 seasons now. So go back, check out old episodes. There's so many great micro pods, conversations with thought leaders from around the world. So Google my name, Jason Barger, and whatever topic you're looking for as it relates to leadership, a culture, mindset, those kind of things, you're going to see and find all kinds of different topics. And I really invite you to do that, and catch yourself back up, or just dive back in and rinse and repeat any of the episodes. My commitment to you, as always, when you listen to this podcast, is I want this to be a place for you to step back, for you to have a little good oxygen breathed into you, and some time to think about the temperature you're trying to set in your life and your work. And so I'm going to continue to try to deliver content that helps you do that and gives you some good stuff to think about. If you'll do me the quick favor before we dive into today's podcast, if you will rate the podcast, if you haven't subscribed, please do that. But if you will rate the podcast 5 stars on whatever platform you're listening on, that is super helpful. If you will leave an authentic review in your own words, why are these messages important in the world today? In a very noisy, negative world, why are these messages helpful, and what redeeming value do they have? Any of your honest, authentic words help the algorithms and help more people find it. And then, of course, anytime you share the podcast with the people around you, whether that's on social media, an episode that resonates with you, share it so that more people can think about it and see it and hear it. Or if you say, hey, on our team and our organization, let's listen to this podcast and then let's talk about the questions together. All of those ways help amplify these messages further in the world. And I appreciate everybody who helps that happen. Thank you, thank you, thank you. I've been enamored by championship teams for as long as I can remember. As a kid, I remember being in awe of NC State's improbable 1983 National Men's Basketball Championship win over the highly favored Houston team, where famously Jim Valvano running around the court after the game, after the alley-oop to end the game, and that team captivated the imagination of the whole world. And this idea of a Cinderella of winning a championship when people didn't think they could. I remember watching and trying to figure out why the Boston Celtics and Los Angeles Lakers always seemed to win the NBA's World Championship. I remember growing up and watching the New England Patriots later in life and studying why they seemed to always overachieve and become champions when others seemed to have more talent. Even later in life, and in the work I do in the world today, I've carried this curiosity about championship teams on the fields into my study, research, and experience in the companies and into companies and organizations. I've watched individuals and organizations who have achieved success over longer periods of time, championship teams, if you will, to study what it is about their growing success. Why were organizations like Amazon or Apple or Netflix and Starbucks so successful over the long haul? How did Warren Buffett become such a successful and championship level investor that everybody talks about? There are similarities and characteristics we can learn from in order to strengthen our own personal leadership mindset and habits, as well as growing the culture of stronger teams and stronger organizations. So, on today's podcast, we're talking about the glue of championship teams that seems to hold them together, make them stronger and unique, help them withstand the pressures around them, and ultimately succeed by becoming the best team they could possibly be. But before we dive into today's topic, let's pause, take a quick break, and we'll be right back.
Many teams and organizations right now are realizing that they need to do both. They need to engage the minds and hearts of their people in person, where everyone in the room can experience the energy of congregating together and find clarity for the road ahead. And they also need to continue to find ways to engage the minds and hearts of their people virtually, with those who are working remotely or at a distance. So, if you are in the process of planning your next team meeting, company all-hands event, conference, or culture summit, and are looking for support with a powerful keynote speech, facilitated team conversations that are the currency for change, or deeper development on leadership mindset and an intentional strategy for the culture you're trying to create, I hope you'll contact us at jasonvbarger.com, jasonvbarger.com. It is my privilege and our honor to partner with great people to provide support in these areas. We want to breathe oxygen into your leaders and throughout your organization so you can set the temperature you want for your culture. We look forward to connecting with you soon. I hope you'll contact us at jasonvbarger.com, jasonvbarger.com. It is my privilege and our honor to partner with great people to provide support in these areas. We want to breathe oxygen into your leaders and throughout your organization so you can set the temperature you want for your culture. We look forward to connecting with you soon.
Again, we're talking about the glue of championship teams and organizations today. And as this episode is coming out, just last night, the very first college football national championship was crowned from the first ever 12-team playoff system. And as I record this, I'm recording this prior to that. But what we know about both of the teams that have made their way to the championship game, they are filled with these characteristics and examples of the kind of glue that has kept them together and in position to achieve the goal every team set to begin the year. We're also at the beginning, the NFL playoffs are in swing. So there's a whole lot happening, and this relates to this, not only championship teams and the glue of championship teams literally on the field, but as I've highlighted, what does that mean for our lives in the world of teams and organizations and the glue that really just brings out the best characteristics of championship teams that we can all learn from. So let's take a few minutes to highlight what I'm calling these glue characteristics of championship teams. And as you study their success, here are 5 examples of the glue that separates them from their competition. One is these teams that tend to win championships or be in contentions for championships, they tend to have a mindset of belief and team above self. A mindset of belief and team above self. If you study these championship teams, a mindset of true belief that the goal is possible, and in each person on the team, they seem to radiate this feeling that, no, we believe that this is possible. Not we hope, we believe. You see individual team members setting aside their personal pursuits because the team goal is the highest priority. The team is above the self. An example of this right now is, towards the end of the regular season in the NFL, the Philadelphia Eagles recently had a decision to make at the end of their season regarding their star running back Saquon Barkley, who was on the verge of potentially breaking a very impressive NFL record. But instead, they together decided that the team goal of winning a Super Bowl was more important. They have already won their division and still had sights on the Super Bowl. which, by the way, there's no guarantees that they'll win it. But at the same time, it was more important and more common at that point for teams in that situation to experience what I refer to as cultural dissonance, a misalignment of words and actions. And so if they'd been preaching all year, team above self, all year long, then to stop and say, oh, well, let's put him in jeopardy, and instead of resting him for the playoffs, let's put him out there one more time to go for that individual goal, it could possibly send cultural dissonance throughout the team and override that message of team above self. And so, again, there's no right or wrong answer of what direction you could go, but if you've been preaching, and I'm assuming they had been preaching all year long, team above self, then when it comes to that individual award, to make the decision that they did is let's rest, let's prepare for the playoffs. The team goal is still the biggest goal. That actually anchors this message of team above self. So kudos to them if that was their mindset. I don't know that for sure, but I'm guessing that somewhere along that was at play, so that they did not hopefully create cultural dissonance throughout their team. The second kind of glue characteristic of championship teams that I'll talk about today is individual players that are willing to do the dirty work. If you study every championship team or organization, they have people that are willing to do the quote-unquote dirty work. Not every player can be the quarterback or the point guard or the star goal scorer. Every championship team has players that go the extra mile and make winning plays that don't always show up in the traditional box score. My guy and multi-time visitor to this podcast, Shane Battier, former Duke basketball star, legend, and champion, as well as two-time NBA championship, is celebrated as the ultimate kind of glue guy. And in fact, he's got a brand new podcast called Glue Guys, which is a great podcast out there. You ought to check it out. It's really been great. I've loved listening to it so far. But he's referred to that because of all the little things he did as a player that, as researchers and statisticians dove deeper into his play, they realized the value of his contributions was so much greater than they appeared in the box score. The rate at which he ran back on defense, the number of deflections he got, the way that he held the opponents who's from scoring in their the positions that they scored the most, all these little things that don't show up in the box score, they realized his value and contribution was so much greater than they appeared, and so he was deemed this idea of a glue guy. Every championship team or organization has glue team members who make everyone around them better by their effort and above and beyond contributions to make those winning plays that don't always show up in the final box score. The third characteristic I'll talk about is they embrace failures to find their core genius. They embrace failures to find their core genius. What I mean by this is almost every championship team always has a misstep or failure or blemish at some point. There are very few undefeated champions in the history of sports and certainly the history of organizations. There are always blemishes, missteps, failures at some point. In fact, the best embrace their failures in an effort to find and discover what do they actually do best. What is their core genius? In organizational settings, I'll point out Amazon is a great reminder that not everything they do succeeds. They'll point to the giant failure of their product, the Fire Phone, which you may have never even heard of, because this idea that they spent millions of dollars and time and energy and ready to promote this new product called the Fire Phone crashed and burned. It was a giant failure. And yet Jeff Bezos quickly acknowledged that they will need to fail even bigger than the Fire Phone in the future in order to continue to discover the things that they do best that don't exist yet. my beloved Ohio State Buckeyes football team, which hopefully by the time this comes out, again, I'm recording this before the national championship game, but hopefully they are winning it all, and we can be celebrating that, and hopefully I'm celebrating it on this day that this podcast comes out. But regardless, the Ohio State Buckeyes football team from this past year is a tremendous example of this very thing. They had to go through a process of offensive evolution, discover their core genius of designing plays to get their wide receivers and their weapons in space. They didn't need to run the ball directly up the middle just to prove that they could. That failed, and that helped them realize their genius. They went through a heartbreaking adversity, which I'll mention in a second, in order to then to come back to and discover that's not who we are. Let's make sure that we discover our core genius. And ever since then, they've been on this magical run in dominating fashion. The fourth characteristic I'll point out is that adversity, connected to that, they embrace failures, but adversity championship makes the glue stronger. To hold them together. And sometimes, again, we think we need to avoid failure adversity, but the adversity actually makes the glue stronger. And speaking again of those same Buckeyes, succeed by every single best team, championship level team in history. When adversity arrives,
before we dive into today's topic,
which it inevitably does,
take a quick break, and we'll be right back.
Do they pull apart, or does the glue become stronger? And in many teams and organizations, adversity shows up and they pull apart. They start pointing fingers and blaming, and everybody runs in a different direction, and the train comes off the tracks. Championship level teams, which doesn't mean they always win the championship, but championship level teams, when adversity hits, they don't pull apart. They actually pull together, and the glue gets stronger. And so, again, after Ohio State lost to Michigan in a major upset, the last game of the season, to end the regular season, a major upset, adversity was at an all-time high, and many were screaming for the coach to be fired. The season was a failure. They were in a pit of adversity. And then they pulled together rather than pointing fingers and found that core genius, and with a passion and an alignment unmatched, they began to go on a very impressive run. Again, as I record this, we don't know whether they won the national championship, but hopefully they did. But even if they didn't, if they got to the end and still didn't, they showed the ability to move through that adversity. And in fact, all of the Final Four teams left in this playoff to this point have shown that level of adversity and pulling together rather than pulling apart. Notre Dame lost to Northern Illinois earlier in the year, and everybody around the country was saying, how could Notre Dame possibly lose to Northern Illinois? And yet they pulled together rather than pulled apart. Adversity arrived, and they pulled together. Penn State was told they could never win the big games as they lost to Ohio State and Oregon earlier in the year. And yet adversity arrived, and they pulled together, and now they've gone on a little bit of a run. Similarly, Texas couldn't win the big one, is what they were saying. Only and they lost, multiple times this year. Only one team ultimately wins it all, but each of these Final Four teams showed the resilience required when adversity does arrive. It doesn't guarantee you'll be a champion, but the ones that are there in the end are ones that are able to adversity actually makes the glue stronger. And then the fifth glue characteristic I'll talk about for today is that the consistency in the culture. The consistency in the culture. As you look at championship teams, they are consistent in their messaging and their work. They have a cultural mantra that carries them and they don't deviate from. They show up and they do the work. If you study the success of Warren Buffett, who now is celebrated as this guru investor, it actually isn't because, and if you really study his work and his path to become this world-known, guru investor, you would think it's because he's had these giant wins, these giant investments, these brilliant moves that have put him, that nobody else made and that other people couldn't see, and he made them and he became the champion. And yet, that's really not the truth. There are other people that have made very similar moves to him. The truth is that he's just been amazingly consistent and deliberate in his investments over a very long period of time. And over time, that, growing, accruing discipline and deliberate and consistent behaviors have led to then these amazing results. The reality is most people and most teams and most organizations get bored. They get distracted, or they aren't able to stay consistent and deliberate. So, as always, I want to end the podcast with a few questions to ponder for us. What glue characteristics are needed to be strengthened within your team or your organization? What excites you about your pursuits in your life and your work? And who around you helps make everything and everyone around you better? I hope today's episode got you thinking in many new ways. If a deeper dive in any of these topics is helpful to you, or if we can be supportive to your team, your organization, and the development of people or culture, I hope you'll contact us, info@jasonvbarger.com, and we'll continue to design content that meets you where you are and continues to hopefully strengthen your thinking about the temperature you're hoping to set in your life and your work. Lastly, I'll just remind you to go back to Google my name, Jason Barger, and any topic you're looking for. There's so many different episodes out there that I really hope you'll go back and listen to past episodes, and then, of course, rate them and review them and share them with the people around you. Cheers to wherever you are today, wherever you're heading in the year ahead, and cheers to all of us as we recognize that we have an opportunity to get clear on the temperature that we're hoping to set in our life and our work, and then to be courageous enough and committed enough to breathe oxygen into the mindsets and the actions that will sustain our path forward. So, step back, remember, be a thermostat, and breathe good oxygen. Thank you for listening to today's podcast, and I hope the messages and questions stimulate positive change along your path. As always, if these messages resonate with you and add value to your life, I hope you'll help amplify them throughout the world. Please rate, comment, and share on whatever podcast or social media platform you're using, and share this podcast with the people in your life or work who should be part of these conversations. That way, this spirit does, in fact, spread. If these messages or developing leaders and culture would be helpful to you and your organization, please contact us at jasonvbarger.com, jasonvbarger.com. And remember, we are all ambassadors for the culture we want to create in our life and work. We have to own the vision we want to be a part of. The future of leadership is you, is me, is us. Be a thermostat.